You think anyone would look at a scarred freak like you?" Marcus sneered, ripping the wedding ring off Elena's finger. "I picked you up from the gutter. Now I'm putting you back where you belong." He grabbed Elena's hair and dragged her toward the door while his mistress sat on the sofa, giggling. "Show her, Marcus. Show her the monster you've had to put up with for 2 years." Marcus tore the shirt off Elena's back. The burn scars sprawled across her skin, exposed under the harsh light. Their laughter echoed through the room like knives plunging into her chest. "Get out!" Marcus kicked Elena into the hallway, throwing her shoes after her. "And don't you dare come back. No one will ever believe a crazy little orphan like you." The door slammed shut. A death sentence for 2 years of hell. Elena dragged herself down the stairs, stumbling out into the Chicago streets, screaming with storm. Rain whipped against her face like lashes. Her torn shirt couldn't cover the scars on her back. But she couldn't feel anything anymore. That night, when Elena stood on the railing of Michigan Bridge, staring down at the black river churning below, she thought about letting go. Just one more step. Just one more step and it would all be over. Then headlights swept across. A black car stopped. The door opened. A man stepped out into the rain, tall, dressed in a black suit, eyes gray as a storm. But the moment he saw Elena standing on the bridge railing, those eyes shattered. "Elena." His voice cracked like breaking glass, as if the whole world was collapsing into a single name. Elena turned around. Rain blurred her vision, but she still recognized him. That face, that long scar on his right arm, the scar he'd carried since he was 10 years old. Protecting her, Dom, and Marcus Webb, the man who thought he could throw Elena away like a broken thing, would never have guessed that he had just laid hands on the only person the most feared Mafia boss in Chicago had sworn to protect for 25 years. With his blood, with his bones, with his very soul. Sit down and listen to this story, because sometimes darkness doesn't come to swallow you whole. It comes to shelter you from those who think they are the light. But to understand that fateful night, we need to turn back the clock to that morning, when everything was still quiet, in a way that was terrifying. Elena woke at 4:30 in the morning. She didn't need an alarm clock. Her body had learned to jolt awake at the exact minute, trained by 2 years of consequences she couldn't afford to repeat. She lay still for a moment, listening to Marcus's breathing beside her. Slow, heavy, the breathing of a man who slept without guilt. Her ribs ached where he'd kicked her the night before, and she could feel the fresh bruises blooming across her stomach like dark flowers under her skin. She slipped out of bed without making a sound. Her feet touched the cold hardwood floor, and she bit her lip to keep from wincing. Every movement was calculated, every breath was measured. She had become a ghost in her own home. In the bathroom, Elena avoided the mirror. She couldn't bear to see what she'd become. Instead, she splashed cold water on her face and began her morning ritual, the one she'd performed over 500 times since the day she became Mrs. Marcus Webb. The kitchen was her battlefield. Eggs had to be cooked exactly 3 minutes. No more, no less. Toast had to be golden on both sides, evenly browned, not a single dark spot. Coffee at precisely 140 degrees, no sugar, 2 ice cubes to cool it to drinking temperature. She remembered the first time she got it wrong. It was 3 weeks after the wedding. The eggs were slightly overdone, the edges just beginning to crisp. Marcus didn't yell. He didn't hit her. He simply looked at her with those cold eyes and said, "Kneel in the corner." She'd knelt there for 4 hours. Every 15 minutes, he made her repeat the same phrase. "I am worthless. I am worthless. I am worthless." 100 times before he finally let her stand. Her knees had been bruised for 2 weeks. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she'd started to believe it. At 7 o'clock, Marcus came downstairs in his charcoal gray suit, handsome, polished, the perfect image of a successful lawyer. No one would ever guess what lived behind those eyes. He sat at the table and scanned the plate. Elena stood nearby, hands clasped behind her back, heart pounding as she waited for the verdict. "Turn around," Marcus said without looking up. Elena turned slowly, lifting her blouse just enough to show her back. The old burn scars were always visible, but it was the fresh bruises he was checking, making sure they wouldn't show above her collar. "Good." He took a bite of eggs. "You're learning." His phone buzzed on the table. Elena caught a glimpse of the screen before he flipped it over. A woman's name, Tiffany, a red heart emoji beside it. Her chest tightened, but she didn't dare ask. The last time she'd questioned a strange message, Marcus had locked her in the bedroom closet for an entire night. She'd learned to swallow her questions the way she'd learned to swallow everything else. Marcus finished his breakfast, kissed her forehead without warmth, and walked out the door. The moment his car disappeared down the street, Elena released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Then immediately, guilt flooded through her. She was relieved her husband had left. What kind of wife felt relief when her husband walked out the door? What kind of broken, ungrateful woman had she become? Elena stood alone in the silent kitchen, staring at the plate Marcus had left half-finished, and tried to remember the last time she'd felt happy. She couldn't. She didn't know that by tonight, she would be standing on a bridge, ready to let go. She didn't know that the boy who'd once protected her would step out of the darkness to catch her before she fell. All she knew was that this morning felt different, heavier, like the air before a storm that was about to break everything apart. But to understand how Elena became the woman standing alone in that kitchen, we need to go back 25 years, to the night that burned away her childhood and left scars that would never fade. Elena was 3 years old when the fire came. She woke to the smell of smoke, not the warm, comforting smell of her mother's cooking, but something sharp and terrible that clawed at her throat. The ceiling above her bed was glowing orange, and the air was so hot it hurt to breathe. "Mama," her small voice was swallowed by the roar of flames. She climbed out of bed, her bare feet touching the floor that was already growing warm. The hallway was a tunnel of fire. Smoke billowed thick and black, stinging her eyes until tears streamed down her cheeks. She heard her mother screaming her name from somewhere far away. She heard her father's voice, desperate, breaking. Then she heard nothing but the hungry crackling of flames devouring everything she knew. A burning beam fell from the ceiling and struck her back. Elena screamed. The pain was unlike anything she'd ever felt, a white-hot agony that seared through her skin and into her bones. She collapsed onto the floor, unable to move, unable to breathe, watching the fire dance closer and closer. Then arms wrapped around her. A firefighter, his face hidden behind a mask, pulled her from the inferno and carried her into the cold night air. She remembered the flashing lights, the sirens, the oxygen mask pressed against her face. She remembered asking for her mama, over and over. No one answered. Her parents didn't make it out. Elena spent 3 months in the hospital. The burns on her back were severe, covering nearly half of her small body. The doctors did what they could, but the scars would remain forever, a twisted map of that terrible night carved into her flesh. When she was finally released, there was nowhere for her to go. No grandparents, no aunts or uncles, no one who wanted a 3-year-old orphan with a ruined back. They sent her to St. Michael's orphanage on the outskirts of Chicago. Elena didn't speak for 6 months after arriving. The trauma had stolen her voice, locked it somewhere deep inside where the fire couldn't reach. The therapists called it selective mutism. But Elena knew the truth. She simply had nothing left to say. At night, she would lie in her small bed and cry without sound. Her mouth would form the word mama over and over, but no sound would come out. Just silent screams into her pillow until exhaustion pulled her under. The other children didn't understand. They only saw the scars. "Monster," they whispered when she walked past. "Freak, don't touch her. You'll catch it." They pulled at her clothes, trying to see the scars beneath. They drew pictures of burned creatures and slipped them under her door. They made sure she knew, every single day, that she was different, that she was broken, that no one would ever want her. Elena learned to hide. She learned to make herself small, invisible, a shadow that moved through the orphanage without being seen. She stopped hoping anyone would come for her. She stopped believing she deserved to be saved. She was 3 years old, and already, she had given up on the world. But she didn't know that salvation was already there, watching her from across the dining hall, a 10-year-old boy with hollow eyes and bruised knuckles, who knew exactly what it felt like to be broken. His name was Dominic Stone, and he would change everything. Dominic Stone arrived at St. Michael's 2 years before Elena, when he was 8 years old. He came with nothing but the clothes on his back and a darkness in his eyes that made the adults look away. The police report said his mother had been beaten to death by his father, a drunk who couldn't control his fists. What the report didn't say was that Dominic had watched the whole thing. Every blow, every scream, every moment until his mother stopped moving and his father turned the gun on himself. Dominic didn't cry at the funeral. He didn't cry when they put him in the back of a social worker's car. He simply stopped feeling anything at all. At St. Michael's, he became the quietest child anyone had ever seen. He didn't play with the others. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He sat alone in corners, reading books or staring out windows at nothing. The other children learned quickly to leave him alone. There was something in his eyes that warned them away, something cold and empty that promised violence if pushed too far. For 2 years, Dominic existed like a ghost. He watched everything. He trusted no one. He waited for the day he'd be old enough to leave this place and never look back. Then Elena arrived, and something inside him cracked open. He noticed her on her first day, the tiny girl with the bandaged back, clutching a stuffed rabbit that was missing one ear. She didn't speak. She didn't look at anyone. She just sat in the corner of the dining hall, making herself as small as possible, as if she was trying to disappear. Dominic recognized that look. He'd worn it himself for 2 years. He didn't approach her. He wasn't good with words, and he didn't know how to comfort anyone. But he watched. He always watched. 6 months passed. Elena still hadn't spoken a single word, and the bullying had gotten worse. It happened on a Thursday night. Dominic was walking back to his room when he heard laughter coming from the bathroom at the end of the hall. Cruel laughter. The kind that meant someone was being hurt. He pushed open the door and felt his blood turn to ice. 4 older boys had Elena cornered against the wall. One of them had ripped off her shirt, exposing the burn scars that covered her back. They were pointing and laughing, their faces twisted with disgust. "Look at the monster!" one of them jeered. "No wonder nobody wants her. Who'd adopt something that looks like that?" Elena stood frozen, her arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming silently down her face. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just stood there, accepting it, as if she believed every word they said. Something snapped inside. Dominic. He launched himself at the largest boy without thinking. His fist connected with bone, and then everything became chaos. 4 against 1. Fists and kicks flying. Someone pulled a pocket knife and slashed at Dominic's right arm. Blood sprayed across the tile floor, hot and red, but Dominic didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He kept swinging, kept fighting, until one by one the boys fled, leaving him standing there, breathing hard, blood dripping from his arm onto the white tiles. He turned to Elena. She was still pressed against the wall, shaking like a leaf, her bare back exposed to the cold air. Dominic pulled off his own jacket and draped it gently over her shoulders, covering the scars, covering the shame. Then he knelt down so he was at her eye level. His arm was still bleeding. His knuckles were split and raw, but his voice was soft when he spoke. "Scars don't make you ugly," he said. "They prove you survived." Elena stared at him. Her lips trembled. For 6 months, she hadn't made a sound. For 6 months, she had locked her voice away where no one could reach it. But now, looking into the eyes of the bleeding boy who had just fought 4 others to protect her, something broke free. "Dom." It was barely a whisper, a single syllable, rough from months of silence, but it was enough. Dominic's eyes widened. Then, for the first time since his mother died, he smiled. From that night on, Elena was no longer alone, and neither was he. From that night in the bathroom, everything changed. Dominic began sleeping outside Elena's door. Every night, without fail, he would drag his thin blanket into the hallway and curl up on the cold floor, his back against her door, like a guard dog protecting its master. The staff tried to stop him at first, but he would simply return the moment they left. Eventually, they gave up. Elena stopped having nightmares. For the first time since the fire, she could close her eyes without seeing flames. Dominic became her teacher. He taught her to read using old picture books he found in the orphanage library. He taught her to write her name, guiding her small hand with his larger one. Every night before bed, he would sit beside her and read fairy tales aloud, his voice low and steady, filling the darkness with stories of princesses and dragons and happy endings. Elena's voice came back slowly, word by word, like flowers pushing through frozen ground. And the first person she spoke to, the only person she wanted to speak to, was always Dominic. He was the only one she allowed to touch her scars. In winter, when the cold made the scar tissue tight and painful, Dominic would sit behind her and gently apply the medicinal cream the nurses provided. His hands were always careful, always soft. He never flinched at the sight of the ruined skin. He never looked at her with pity or disgust. "Does it hurt?" he would ask. "Not when you do it," she would answer. The years passed, and they became inseparable. Where Dominic went, Elena followed. Where Elena was, Dominic was never far behind. The other children stopped bullying her. Everyone knew that hurting Elena meant facing Dominic, and no one was foolish enough to try. But the system didn't care about their bond. Twice, Elena was transferred to different orphanages. Budget cuts, overcrowding, administrative decisions made by people who never saw the children's faces. Each time, Elena screamed and cried, clinging to Dominic until they had to pull her away. And each time, Dominic found a way to bring her back. He didn't tell her how. He didn't explain the deals he made, the favors he traded, The older boys he fought to earn enough respect to make demands. He simply appeared at her new orphanage within weeks, and somehow, miraculously, her transfer papers would be reversed. How? Elena asked him once. It doesn't matter, he said. You're home now. But the worst came when Elena was 9 years old. A family wanted to adopt her. A nice couple from the suburbs who smiled too much and didn't ask about the scars. Elena didn't want to go. She begged the staff to let her stay. But the paperwork was signed, and dreams of a real family overrode everything else. 6 months later, they brought her back. The couple had only wanted the adoption subsidy. When they realized how much care Elena's scars required, how much therapy she needed, how much work she would be, they returned her like a broken toy. Elena shattered. Dominic found her in the garden behind the orphanage, sitting in the rain, not moving, not speaking. She had retreated back into that silent place she'd lived in when she first arrived. Her eyes were empty. Her body was cold. He sat down beside her in the mud and wrapped his arms around her. He didn't say everything would be okay. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He simply held her as the rain poured down, soaking them both to the bone. You don't need them, he whispered into her hair. You have me. They stayed like that all night. And when the sun rose, Elena spoke again. Mrs. Margaret Chen, the orphanage's head caretaker, watched them from her window that morning. She had been at St. Michael's for over 20 years, had seen countless children come and go, but she had never seen anything like the bond between these two broken souls. She began treating them like her own children. Extra food when the portions were small, warm blankets when the heating failed, a kind word when the world was cruel. She knew, even then, that what existed between Dominic and Elena was something rare, something precious, something that would either save them both or destroy them completely. Everything beautiful has an ending. Dominic had always known this. He just hadn't been ready for how much it would hurt. The day he turned 18, the clock started ticking. By law, he had 30 days to leave St. Michael's, 30 days to pack a lifetime of memories into a small duffel bag, 30 days to figure out how to say goodbye to the only person who had ever made him feel human. He didn't tell Elena right away. He couldn't bear to watch the light drain from her eyes, so he spent those 30 days pretending everything was normal, reading her fairy tales at night, sitting with her in the garden, memorizing every detail of her face like a man preparing for a long journey into darkness. But Elena wasn't stupid. She noticed the way he held her a little longer, the way his voice trembled when he said goodnight, the way he looked at her like he was already grieving. On his last night, she found him on the roof. It was their secret place, a flat section above the east wing where they could climb up through a broken window and sit beneath the stars. They had spent countless nights there, talking about everything and nothing, dreaming about futures they weren't sure they would ever have. Elena climbed up and sat beside him. She was 11 years old now, small for her age, with long dark hair and eyes that had seen too much pain for someone so young. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, shoulders touching, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. You're leaving tomorrow, Elena finally said. It wasn't a question. Dominic's jaw tightened. Yes. When are you coming back? The question hung in the cold air between them. Dominic wanted to lie. He wanted to promise her that he would return in a week, a month, a year. He wanted to give her something to hold on to, but he had never lied to her. He couldn't start now. I don't know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The world out there is cruel. I don't have money. I don't have family. I don't have anything. He paused, struggling to find the right words. I can't promise I'll come back. I can't promise I'll even survive. Elena's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. Don't go. Please don't go. You're the only person I have. You're everything to me. Please, Dom. Please don't leave me alone. Dominic held her tight, his own eyes burning. He wanted to stay. God, he wanted to stay more than he had ever wanted anything. But he couldn't. The rules didn't care about love. The system didn't care about broken hearts. I promise, he said slowly, choosing each word with care, that I will always watch over you. Even if you can't see me. Even if you think I've forgotten. I will always be there. Elena pulled back, her face streaked with tears. You promise you'll come back? Dominic looked at her. His chest was splitting open. But he couldn't make a promise he might not be able to keep. I promise you'll always be safe, he said instead. I promise you'll never be truly alone. That night, they stayed on the roof until dawn began to break. Elena fell asleep against his shoulder, exhausted from crying. Dominic didn't sleep at all. He just held her and watched the stars fade one by one. When Elena woke the next morning, she was in her own bed. and Dominic was gone. On her pillow lay a single scrap of paper, the edges torn, the handwriting shaky. Our scars are proof that we survived. Keep surviving. For me, Elena clutched that paper to her chest and cried until she had nothing left. She cried until Mrs. Margaret came and held her. She cried until her voice gave out and her body went limp. He was gone. Her protector, her brother, her entire world, and she had no idea if she would ever see him again. After Dominic left, Elena waited. She waited through the long nights, listening for footsteps in the hallway. She waited through the cold winters, watching the gates for a familiar figure. She waited through birthdays and holidays and ordinary days that blurred into one endless ache. 1 year passed, then 2, then 7. Dominic never came back. No letters, no phone calls, no sign that he even remembered she existed. Slowly, painfully, Elena accepted the truth. She had been abandoned again, just like her parents had left her in the fire, just like the foster family had returned her like damaged goods. Dominic had promised to watch over her, but promises meant nothing. Everyone left eventually. Everyone forgot. On her 18th birthday, Elena walked out of street. Michael's with $300 in her pocket, a small suitcase of worn clothes, and a heart that had turned to stone. Mrs. Margaret hugged her at the gates, tears streaming down her weathered face. Take care of yourself, child, and remember, you are stronger than you know. Elena nodded but didn't cry. She had no tears left. The world outside was exactly as cruel as Dominic had warned. Elena rented a tiny room in a rundown neighborhood where the walls were thin and the heating never worked. She found a job as a waitress at a diner downtown, working double shifts just to afford rice and instant noodles. But even that didn't last. I'm sorry, her manager said after 2 weeks, not meeting her eyes. Customers have been complaining. They say your scars make them uncomfortable. We need someone more presentable. Elena learned to hide. She bought high-collared shirts and sweaters that covered every inch of skin. She learned to move carefully so her clothes never shifted. She learned to make herself invisible, a shadow slipping through a world that didn't want to see her. She worked a dozen different jobs over the years: dishwasher, cleaner, night shift stalker at a grocery store, anything that kept her away from people's eyes. Dating was impossible. The one time she tried, the man had pulled at her shirt in his apartment, curious about what she was hiding. When he saw the scars, his face twisted with disgust. "What the hell happened to you?" he had asked, recoiling like she was diseased. Elena never tried again. 10 years passed in crushing loneliness. 10 years of empty apartments and silent meals and nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering why she was still alive. She had no friends, no family, no one who would notice if she disappeared. She was 28 years old, and she had given up on everything. But strange things kept happening. When she was 3 months behind on rent, ready to be evicted, her landlord suddenly told her the debt had been cleared by an anonymous benefactor. When she got sick with pneumonia and couldn't afford medicine, a package arrived at her door with exactly the antibiotics she needed. When a man followed her home one night with bad intentions, he was found the next morning in an alley, beaten so badly he couldn't remember his own name. Elena told herself it was luck, coincidence, the universe throwing scraps to a stray dog. She never imagined that someone was watching her from the shadows, someone who had built an empire in darkness just to keep her safe, someone who had loved her since she was 3 years old and had never stopped. She didn't know that Dominic Stone had become the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld. She didn't know that his first order of business, after taking control, had been to assign men to watch over her around the clock. She didn't know that he was waiting for the right moment, waiting for her to need him again. All she knew was loneliness, and it was about to get so much worse. Elena was 26 years old when Marcus Webb walked into her life, or rather, when he engineered his entrance with the precision of a predator stalking wounded prey. She was working the night shift at a cheap diner near the south side of Chicago, the kind of place where the coffee was burnt, and the customers didn't look twice at the waitress as long as their orders came fast. Elena preferred it that way. Anonymous, invisible, safe. It was nearly midnight when the group of drunk businessmen stumbled in. 4 of them, ties loosened, faces flushed with whiskey, loud and looking for entertainment. Elena served them with her head down, the way she always did, but one of them wasn't satisfied with being ignored. "Hey, sweetheart," he slurred, grabbing her wrist as she set down his coffee. "Why so shy? Come sit with us." Elena tried to pull away. "I'm working? Please let go." But he didn't let go. He pulled harder, and she stumbled against the table. His friends laughed. And then, before she could stop him, he yanked at the back of her collar. The fabric tore. Her scars were exposed under the flickering fluorescent lights. Silence. Then laughter. Cruel, mocking laughter that echoed through the empty diner. "Jesus Christ, what happened to you?" one of them howled. "You look like someone put you on a grill." Elena ran. She burst through the back door into the dark alley behind the diner, tears streaming down her face, her torn shirt flapping uselessly against her ruined back. She collapsed against the cold brick wall and sobbed, the same way she had sobbed 1,000 times before. Worthless. Monster. Freak. The words echoed in her skull like a curse she could never escape. "Are you all right?" The voice came from the shadows. Elena looked up, her vision blurred with tears, and saw a man stepping into the dim light. He was handsome, tall, with dark hair and kind eyes and a suit that probably cost more than she made in a year. "Those men," he said, his voice warm with concern. "I saw what they did. I called the police. They won't bother you again." Elena couldn't speak. She just stared at him, trembling, exposed. The man took off his coat and draped it gently over her shoulders, covering her scars. His movements were careful, respectful, nothing like the grabbing hands she was used to. "Scars don't define who you are," he said softly. "They're just part of your story, and from what I can see, your story is one of survival." Elena broke down completely. She wept into the coat of this stranger who spoke to her like she was human, like she mattered, like she was something more than a broken thing the world had thrown away. His name was Marcus Webb. He was a lawyer at a prestigious firm downtown, successful, charming, everything Elena had never dared to dream of. In the weeks that followed, Marcus pursued her relentlessly, flowers delivered to her apartment, dinners at restaurants she could never afford, sweet words that filled the empty spaces in her heart. "You're beautiful," he told her. "You're kind. You deserve to be loved. Let me be the one who loves you." After 10 years of crushing loneliness, Elena had no defenses left. She fell for him completely, desperately, the way a drowning person grabs a rope without checking if it's attached to anything. They were married 5 months later in a small ceremony at City Hall. Elena wore a simple white dress with a high back. Marcus smiled at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She thought she had finally been saved. She didn't know that Marcus had been watching her for months before that night in the alley. He had researched her background. Orphan, no family, no friends, no one who would come looking if she disappeared. Elena was the perfect victim, and Marcus Webb had been hunting for someone exactly like her. The drunk businessmen who tore her shirt, Marcus had paid them. The rescue in the alley? Carefully staged. Every kind word, every gentle touch, every romantic gesture was calculated to make her trust him completely. And it worked. By the time Elena realized the truth, she would already be trapped in a cage she couldn't escape. The first 6 months of marriage felt like heaven. Marcus treated Elena like a princess. He took her traveling to places she had only seen in magazines. He bought her expensive clothes, jewelry, perfume. He whispered sweet words into her ear every night before bed. "You're everything to me," he would say, holding her close. "I can't believe I found you. I'll never let you go." Elena believed every word. After a lifetime of abandonment, she had finally found someone who loved her, someone who wanted her, someone who saw past the scars to the woman underneath. She didn't notice the cage slowly closing around her. It started small, subtle, easy to dismiss. "You don't need to work anymore," Marcus said one evening, his voice gentle. "I make enough money for both of us. Stay home. Let me take care of you." Elena thought it was love. She quit her job at the diner. "Your phone is distracting you from us," Marcus said a few weeks later. "Let me hold on to it during dinner so we can focus on each other." He never gave it back. "The neighbors are nosy," he explained, when he installed new locks on all the doors. "I just want to keep you safe." Elena couldn't leave the house without his permission. The control tightened month by month. Marcus monitored everything: what she ate, what she wore, who she talked to. He went through her emails, her browser history, her every thought and movement. "You're gaining weight," he said one morning, looking at her with disgust. "From now on, you only eat 1 meal a day. I won't have a fat wife." Elena stopped eating breakfast. She stopped eating lunch. She grew thin and pale, but Marcus only smiled and said she was finally starting to look acceptable. The psychological torture came next. "Stand in front of the mirror," Marcus ordered one night after she had burned dinner slightly. "Look at yourself. Look at those scars." Elena stood there, trembling, staring at her reflection. "Now say it," Marcus commanded. "Say, 'I am lucky that someone agreed to marry a monster like me.'" Elena's voice broke as she spoke the words, over and over, until she believed them. When she tried to protest, Marcus would tilt his head with a confused expression. I never said that, Elena. You're imagining things again. Are you feeling okay? Maybe there's something wrong with your head. Gaslighting. He rewrote reality until Elena couldn't trust her own memories. She started to wonder if she really was crazy. If she really was the ungrateful monster he described. In the second year, the physical violence began. The first time he hit her, she was so shocked she couldn't even cry. He had slapped her across the face for speaking to the mailman. Just a simple good morning. And Marcus had waited until the door closed before his hand connected with her cheek. Don't ever talk to other men, he said calmly, as if explaining something to a slow child. You belong to me. After that, the beatings came regularly. Slaps, punches, kicks. He dragged her down the stairs by her hair one night because she had forgotten to iron his shirt. The worst was when he cracked her ribs. She had cried out for him to stop, had begged him to take her to a hospital. But Marcus just looked at her with cold eyes and said, If you tell anyone, I'll kill you, and no one will care. Who would miss a crazy little orphan with no family? He bought painkillers and bandages and made her treat herself. Elena thought about running. Every day, she thought about it. But where would she go? She had no money. Marcus controlled every cent. She had no friends. He had isolated her from everyone. She had no family. She never had. And Marcus reminded her constantly. No one will ever believe you, he would say. You're nothing. You're worthless. I'm the only person who would ever want you, and you should be grateful I haven't thrown you out on the street where you belong. Elena started to believe that dying might be easier than living. She didn't know that 17 years ago, a boy had promised to always watch over her. She didn't know that somewhere in the darkness of Chicago's underworld, that boy had become a man who was tracking every bruise, every tear, every moment of her suffering. She didn't know that he was waiting for her to walk out on her own, because if he dragged her away, he would be no different from the monster who held her prisoner. All she knew was pain, and she had almost forgotten what it felt like to hope. Now we return to that night on Michigan Bridge, where Elena stood on the railing with nothing left to lose, and Dominic stepped out of the darkness to catch her. Elena. His voice cracked like breaking glass. Dom? For a moment, neither of them moved. Rain poured down around them, soaking through clothes and skin, but neither noticed. 17 years of separation collapsed into a single heartbeat. Then Dominic lunged forward. He grabbed Elena just as her knees buckled, pulling her off the railing and into his arms. She collapsed against his chest, too weak to stand, too broken to speak. Her torn shirt clung to her skin. The rain mixed with her tears until everything became water. Dominic held her like she was made of glass, like she might shatter if he let go. He didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. He just wrapped his arms around her and let the storm rage around them. I've got you, he finally whispered into her hair. I've got you. You're safe now. Elena couldn't respond. Her body was shaking so violently she could barely breathe. She had been ready to die. She had been so close to letting the river swallow her whole. And now Dominic was here. After 17 years of silence, he was here. She didn't understand. She couldn't process it. All she could do was cling to him like a drowning woman who had finally found shore. Dominic lifted her effortlessly and carried her to the black car waiting nearby. The door opened, and he slid inside with Elena still in his arms. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders, covering the scars, covering the shame. Drive, he ordered. His voice was calm, but his eyes were burning with a rage that made the driver flinch. Elena's head fell against Dominic's shoulder. Exhaustion crashed over her like a wave, and despite everything, she felt safe. Safer than she had felt in 17 years. Her eyes fluttered closed. She slept. Dominic looked down at her as the car sped through the rainy streets. In the dim light, he could see the bruises on her arms, the marks on her neck, the hollowness of her cheeks. His hand curled into a fist so tight his knuckles turned white. Someone had done this to her. Someone had taken the girl he had sworn to protect and broken her into pieces. And Dominic was going to make that person pay in ways they couldn't imagine. The car pulled through iron gates and up a long driveway lined with ancient oak trees. The stone mansion rose from the darkness like a fortress, all dark stone and glowing windows. Dominic carried Elena inside. Servants appeared and disappeared silently, asking no questions. They knew better than to speak when their master had that look in his eyes. He brought her to a bedroom on the second floor, the finest room in the house, with silk sheets and fresh flowers and windows that overlooked the garden. He laid her gently on the bed, pulled the blankets over her, and sat down in the chair beside her. He didn't sleep. He just watched her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest, making sure she was still alive. At 3 a.m, his right-hand man, Victor, appeared in the doorway. "Boss," Victor said quietly. "What do you need?" Dominic's eyes never left Elena's face. "Find out everything about Marcus Webb. His finances, his secrets, his sins, everything." Victor nodded and vanished. Dominic sat in the darkness until dawn, watching the girl he had loved for 25 years finally sleep without fear. And somewhere in the city, Marcus Webb had no idea that he had just made the most dangerous enemy in Chicago. Elena opened her eyes and didn't recognize where she was. Sunlight streamed through thin white curtains, filling the room with a gentle golden glow. She was lying on a wide bed dressed in silk sheets, the kind of fabric she had never touched in her life. The ceiling rose high overhead with intricate carved detailing. Oil paintings hung along the walls, and a crystal chandelier glittered above. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then the memories crashed back like a tidal wave. Marcus, the torn shirt, the laughter, the bridge, the black river churning below, and then Dominic, his voice breaking on her name, his arms pulling her back from the edge. Elena sat up too fast. Her head spun, her heart hammered against her ribs. Where was she? What had happened? Was this real, or had she finally lost her mind completely? The door opened softly. An older woman stepped inside, carrying a silver tray with a steaming cup of tea. Her hair was silver, pinned neatly into a bun at the back of her head. Her face was lined with the gentle wrinkles of time, but her eyes were warm and familiar, so familiar that Elena's breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. "Elena, my dear girl." The woman's voice trembled with emotion. "At last, you're here." Elena stared. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, finally, a whisper. "Mrs. Margaret?" The tray clattered onto the bedside table. "Mrs." Margaret rushed forward and wrapped Elena in her arms, holding her tight, the way she used to hold her when she was a frightened little girl crying for her mother in the dark. Elena broke. All the tears she had held back for 17 years came flooding out. She sobbed into Mrs. Margaret's shoulder, her whole body shaking, clinging to the one person from her childhood who had ever shown her genuine love. "How?" Elena choked out between sobs. "How are you here?" "Mrs." Margaret pulled back, cupping Elena's face in her weathered hands. Tears streamed down her own cheeks. "Dominic found me 15 years ago," she said. "Right after I retired from Street Michaels. He came to my door, this tall young man with cold eyes, and asked if I would come work for him. He said he needed someone he could trust." She paused, her voice cracking. "But I knew the truth. He wanted to keep a piece of the past close, a piece that was connected to you." Elena's chest tightened. He remembered. "Oh, child." "Mrs." Margaret smiled through her tears. "He never forgot. Not for a single day. He always asked about you. Always. Every report his men brought back, he read personally. Every photo, he kept. He's been watching over you all these years, even when you couldn't see him." Elena couldn't speak. The weight of those words pressed down on her, rearranging everything she had believed for 17 years. Dominic hadn't abandoned her. He had never forgotten. He had been there all along, hidden in the shadows, keeping his promise in ways she never knew. "Mrs." Margaret helped Elena to the bathroom, running a warm bath, laying out fresh clothes. Elena moved like a sleepwalker, still processing, still trying to understand. When she finally sat down to eat, her hands trembled around the teacup. She looked up at Mrs. Margaret before taking a sip. "May I drink this?" she asked quietly. "Mrs." Margaret froze. Pain flickered across her face. "May I eat the toast?" Elena continued, her voice small. "I don't want to do anything wrong. Please tell me if I'm doing something wrong." "Mrs." Margaret set down the plate she was holding. She walked over and knelt beside Elena's chair, taking her hands gently. "Listen to me," she said firmly, but with infinite kindness. "You don't need permission to eat. You don't need permission to drink. You don't need permission to breathe." Her voice broke. "You don't need anyone's permission to exist, Elena. Not here. Not ever again." Elena stared at her. For 2 years, she had asked Marcus for permission to do everything. To eat, to sleep, to speak. She had forgotten what it felt like to make her own choices. Tears spilled down her cheeks again. "I don't know how to be free," she whispered. Mrs. Margaret squeezed her hands. "Then we'll teach you. One day at a time." That afternoon, Elena went looking for Dominic. Mrs. Margaret had told her where to find him. Down the long hallway, past the portraits and marble statues, to the heavy oak door at the end. His study, the heart of his empire. Elena knocked once, then pushed the door open without waiting for an answer. The room was large, lined with bookshelves that rose to the ceiling. A massive oak desk sat at the center, covered with papers and files. And behind that desk stood Dominic, his back to her, staring out the window at the rain-soaked gardens below. He didn't turn around when she entered, but she could see his shoulders tense. "Elena," his voice was low, careful. "You should be resting. 17 years. The words came out sharper than she intended. 17 years, Dominic. Why didn't you contact me?" Silence stretched between them. The rain tapped against the windows like 1,000 tiny fingers. Finally, Dominic turned to face her. His gray eyes were heavy with something she couldn't name. Pain, maybe. Or regret. "When I left Street Michael's, I had nothing," he began, his voice rough. "No money, no family, no skills except fighting. I slept under bridges. I ate from garbage cans. I did things I'm not proud of just to survive." Elena stood frozen, listening. "One night, I accidentally saved a man from being attacked in an alley. He turned out to be the head of one of Chicago's most powerful organizations." Dominic paused. "He took me in, trained me, taught me everything, how to fight, how to lead, how to kill." The word hung in the air like smoke. "I climbed the ranks," Dominic continued, "step by step, year by year. I did terrible things, Elena, things that would give you nightmares. And when the old boss died 5 years ago, I took his place." He looked at her, his gaze unflinching. "I am darkness. I am everything the world warns you about, and I couldn't drag you into this. I couldn't stain your life with my sins." Elena's hands trembled at her sides. "Then why did you watch me?" Mrs. Margaret told me. "The rent payments, the medicine, the man who followed me home and ended up beaten half to death. That was all you?" Dominic nodded slowly. "I couldn't stay away completely. I tried. God knows I tried. But I couldn't let you suffer when I had the power to help. Then why didn't you save me from Marcus?" The question burst out of her like a wound tearing open. "You knew, didn't you? You knew what he was doing to me. Why didn't you come sooner?" Dominic closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "Because you loved him," he said quietly. "Or you thought you did. You chose him, Elena. You married him. You looked at him like he was your salvation." His voice cracked. "If I had dragged you away against your will, how would I be any different from him? It would still be control. It would still be deciding your life for you." Elena felt the tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't love him. I was so lonely. I was so tired of being alone. He said the right things. He made me believe someone could actually want me. I know." Dominic's voice was barely a whisper. "I watched you fall for his lies, and I hated myself for letting it happen. I told myself I was respecting your choice. But the truth is, I was a coward. I was afraid that if I appeared, you would reject me, that you would choose him over me." He turned away, unable to meet her eyes. "I waited for you to leave on your own. I told myself that when you were ready, when you finally walked away, I would be there to catch you." His hands clenched into fists. "I didn't know it would take 2 years. I didn't know how much he would hurt you, and I will never forgive myself for that." Elena crossed the room. She stopped right behind him, close enough to touch. "I thought you forgot me," she whispered. "All those years, I thought you had moved on, built a new life without me." Dominic laughed bitterly. "Forget you? I've never stopped thinking about you, not for a single day, not for a single hour." He finally turned to face her. "You are the only light I have ever known, Elena. And I have spent 17 years trying to be worthy of protecting it." Elena looked at the man standing before her. The most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago, the boy who had once bled to protect her from bullies. The same person, shaped by darkness but still reaching toward the light. "I was so alone," she said, her voice breaking. "I needed you." Dominic reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheek. His touch was feather-light, as if he was afraid she might shatter. "I know," he said, "and I hate myself for leaving you alone. But I'm here now, and I'm never leaving again." The first week was the hardest. Elena moved through the mansion like a ghost, flinching at every sound, shrinking into corners whenever someone walked past. 2 years of living in fear had carved themselves into her bones, and she couldn't simply shake them off. She asked permission for everything. "May I sit here?" she would ask before lowering herself onto a chair. "May I use the bathroom?" she would whisper, even when no one was watching. "Is it okay if I eat this?" she would inquire, her hand hovering over a piece of bread as if it might explode. Mrs. Margaret answered every question with patience and gentle reassurance. "Yes, child, you can do whatever you want." But the habits were too deep. The fear was too ingrained. Loud noises made Elena freeze. A door slamming, a phone ringing, Even laughter from the servants in the hallway sent her heart racing, her body tensing for the blow that was sure to follow. It never came, but she couldn't stop waiting for it. Mirrors were the worst. Elena avoided them completely. She couldn't bear to see her own reflection. Marcus had made her stand before the mirror so many times, forcing her to stare at her scars, forcing her to repeat those horrible words about being a monster. Now, even a glimpse of glass made her stomach turn. Dominic noticed everything, but he never pushed. He was careful never to touch her without warning. He always announced his presence before entering a room. He kept his voice low and steady, never raising it, never making sudden movements. At night, when the nightmares came and Elena woke screaming, Dominic was there, not in her room, but right outside her door, sitting in the hallway the same way he had done when they were children. She would open the door to find him there, his gray eyes soft in the darkness. "I'm here," he would say quietly. "Go back to sleep. Nothing can hurt you." The second week brought small changes. Elena started walking through the mansion on her own. She explored the library, running her fingers along the spines of hundreds of books. She sat in the sunroom and watched the rain. She began to breathe a little easier. "Mrs. Margaret invited her to the kitchen one morning. 'Do you remember how to bake?' she asked with a gentle smile. 'I taught you, back at Street Michael's.' Let's see if those hands still remember." Elena's hands shook as she measured flour and cracked eggs. But slowly, the familiar motions came back to her. The smell of butter and vanilla filled the kitchen, and for a brief moment, she felt like the little girl who used to find comfort in Mrs. Margaret's cooking lessons. Dominic began eating dinner with her every evening. He didn't ask questions about Marcus or the past 2 years. He just sat across from her, making small talk about the weather or books or nothing at all. His presence was steady, undemanding, safe. For the first time in 2 years, Elena slept through the night without screaming. One afternoon, she wandered into the garden behind the mansion. The rain had stopped, and pale sunlight filtered through the clouds. She walked along the stone paths, breathing in the fresh air, feeling something almost like peace. Then she stopped. Before her stretched an entire garden of white roses, hundreds of them, blooming in perfect rows, their petals soft and pure against the gray sky. White roses, her favorite flower. She had mentioned it once, just once, when she was 8 years old. Dominic had asked what kind of flowers she liked, and she had said white roses because they looked like snow. That was 20 years ago. Elena sank to her knees in the middle of the garden. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the roses, understanding finally crashing over her. Dominic remembered. He remembered everything, every small detail, every passing comment, every piece of her that she had forgotten about herself. He had planted this garden for her. He had built this entire world waiting for the day she would come home. And now she was here. Marcus Webb was not a man who accepted rejection. For 2 weeks after that night in the storm, he waited for Elena to come crawling back. She always came back. She had nowhere else to go. No money, no family, no one who would believe a word she said. But the days passed, and Elena didn't return. Marcus's patience turned to irritation. Irritation turned to fury. She was his property. She didn't get to leave unless he decided to throw her away. He hired a private investigator. Within 3 days, the man returned with a folder and a nervous look on his face. "She's at the Stone Mansion," the investigator said, sliding the folder across Marcus's desk. Dominic Stone's estate. Marcus flipped through the photos. Elena walking in a garden. Elena sitting by a window. Elena looking healthier and calmer than she had in years. "Who is Dominic Stone?" Marcus demanded. The investigator hesitated. "They call him the Stone. He runs the largest criminal organization in Chicago. Maybe the entire Midwest." He swallowed hard. "Sir, I strongly advise you to. I didn't ask for your advice." Marcus slammed the folder shut. "She's my wife. I don't care who this Stone person thinks he is." 2 days later, Marcus drove to the mansion himself. The iron gates rose before him like the entrance to a fortress. Armed men in black suits stood on either side, watching him with cold eyes. Marcus rolled down his window and put on his most authoritative voice. "I'm here to see my wife," he announced. "Elena Webb. She's being held here against her will." The guards didn't move. One of them spoke into a radio. A long minute passed. Then the gates opened. Marcus smirked. Money and power always worked. These criminals would learn that a successful lawyer from a prestigious firm wasn't someone to be ignored. He drove up the long driveway and parked in front of the mansion. As he stepped out of his car, the front door opened. Dominic Stone walked out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His gray eyes were cold as winter. Behind him, 2 massive bodyguards flanked the entrance like statues. Marcus straightened his tie. "I'm Marcus Webb. I'm here to collect my wife." Dominic stopped 10 feet away. He didn't speak. He just looked at Marcus the way a predator looks at something small and insignificant. "She belongs to me," Marcus continued, his voice growing less steady. "I don't know what lies she's told you, but she's mentally unstable. She needs professional help. Now return her to me, or I'll call the police and have you arrested for kidnapping." Silence. Dominic took a step closer, then another. He moved slowly, deliberately, until he was close enough that Marcus could see the ice in his eyes. "She doesn't want to see you," Dominic said. His voice was quiet, almost soft, and somehow, that made it more terrifying. "She's my wife," Marcus insisted, but his voice cracked. "She's not property." Dominic's words cut like a blade. "She's not something you own, and if you ever show your face here again, if you send anyone to follow her, if you so much as speak her name in public, I will personally show you why all of Chicago is afraid to hear my name." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And believe me, no one will ever find what's left of you." Marcus stumbled backward. His legs were shaking. His face had gone white. All his arrogance, all his confidence, evaporated like mist in sunlight. He turned and ran to his car. The engine roared to life, and he sped back down the driveway, nearly crashing into the gates as they opened. Dominic watched until the car disappeared. Then he turned and looked up at the second-floor window. Elena stood there, watching. She had seen everything. For the first time in 2 years, someone had stood up for her. Someone had looked at the monster who had broken her and said no. She pressed her hand against the glass, and Dominic nodded once before walking back inside. That night, Elena slept without a single nightmare. A week after Marcus fled from the mansion gates, Elena found herself in the kitchen with Mrs. Margaret. It had become their ritual. Every afternoon, they would cook together, just like they had done at Street Michael's when Elena was a little girl. The familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables and stirring pots brought Elena a peace she hadn't felt in years. Today, they were making apple pie. Elena kneaded the dough while Mrs. Margaret peeled apples, the sweet scent filling the warm kitchen. "You know," Mrs. Margaret said casually, not looking up from her work, "Dominic has loved you since you were 3 years old." Elena's hands froze in the dough. "What?" Mrs. Margaret smiled, her weathered fingers continuing their steady work. "You heard me, child. That's not." Elena shook her head. "He was like a brother to me. He protected me. That's all it was." Mrs. Margaret set down her knife and turned to face Elena fully. Her eyes were soft but knowing. "Elena, that boy is 37 years old. In all the years I've known him, he has never had anyone. Not a girlfriend, not a lover, not even a casual affair." She paused. "Do you know how many beautiful women have tried to get close to him? Daughters of powerful families, stunning models, women who would do anything to be with the most powerful man in Chicago." Elena stared at her. "He never looked at any of them," Mrs. Margaret continued. "Not once, because his heart has always belonged to someone else." Elena felt dizzy. That can't be true. Mrs. Margaret took her hand and led her out of the kitchen, down a hallway Elena had never explored. They stopped before a small door at the end. "He doesn't know I'm showing you this," Mrs. Margaret said quietly, "but you need to see." She opened the door. Inside was a small room, barely larger than a closet, but what filled it made Elena's breath catch in her throat. Photographs, hundreds of them, covering every wall. Elena as a child at Street Michael's. Elena as a teenager. Elena as a young woman walking to work. Elena sitting alone in her tiny apartment. Every stage of her life, captured and preserved, and in one corner, pinned carefully to a board, were drawings, childish sketches on yellowed paper. A 10-year-old boy's attempts to draw a 3-year-old girl with long dark hair. "He kept everything," Mrs. Margaret whispered. "Every photo his men took. Every drawing he made when he was a child. 25 years, Elena. He has loved you for 25 years and never said a word." Elena sank to her knees. Tears streamed down her face as she looked around the room. This wasn't the obsession of a stalker. This was the devotion of a man who had loved someone his entire life and never asked for anything in return. "This isn't brotherly love," Mrs. Margaret said gently. "This is a man who would burn the world for you and never tell you he lit the match." Elena couldn't speak. She walked out of the room, through the hallway, out the back door, and into the garden of white roses. She sat on a stone bench and cried. She thought about Marcus, The man who had said he loved her and then turned her into a prisoner, who had used sweet words as chains and affection as a weapon. Then she thought about Dominic, the man who had loved her in silence for a quarter of a century, who had watched her marry someone else and done nothing because he respected her right to choose, who had waited in the darkness, asking for nothing, protecting her from shadows she never knew existed. That was real love. Not possession, not control, but sacrifice, patience, and the willingness to let someone be free, even if it broke your heart. Elena looked at the white roses blooming around her and finally understood. She had been looking for love in all the wrong places, and the one who truly loved her had been there all along. After discovering the truth about Dominic's feelings, something shifted inside Elena. She spent days thinking about everything. Her past, her present, the future she had never allowed herself to imagine. For so long, she had been surviving, existing, waiting for someone else to decide her fate. But she was tired of waiting. She was tired of being a victim. One evening, she found Dominic in his study. He looked up from his papers when she entered, his gray eyes softening the way they always did when he saw her. "I want to open a bakery," Elena said. Dominic set down his pen. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss her. He just listened. "When I was little, Mrs. Margaret taught me how to bake," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. "It was the only time I felt happy. The only time I felt like I was creating something instead of just surviving." She paused. "I want to feel that again. I want to build something that's mine." Dominic leaned back in his chair. A small smile crossed his face. "Then do it," he said simply. Elena blinked. "You don't think it's foolish? I think it's exactly what you need." Dominic stood and walked around the desk to stand before her. "This is your dream, Elena, not mine. Every decision is yours. I'll support you however you need, but I won't control you. I won't tell you what to do." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Marcus had once told her that opening a bakery was a childish fantasy, that she should focus on being a good wife instead of chasing stupid dreams. But Dominic wasn't Marcus. Dominic would never be Marcus. In the weeks that followed, Elena threw herself into planning. She searched for locations and found the perfect spot just 3 blocks from Street Michael's orphanage, a small storefront with big windows and a warm brick interior. "I want to be close to where I grew up," she explained to Dominic. "I want those kids to see that where you start doesn't have to be where you end." When it came time to hire staff, Elena made a decision that surprised everyone. "I want to hire women who've been through what I've been through," she said. "Survivors of abuse, women who need a second chance." Dominic nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." Elena chose the name herself. Second Dawn. A new sunrise. A reminder that no matter how dark the night, morning always comes. As the bakery took shape, so did Elena. She made decisions without asking permission. She voiced her opinions without fearing punishment. She walked through the world with her head a little higher each day. One morning, she stood before the mirror in her bedroom. For the first time in years, she didn't look away. She turned slowly, looking at the burn scars that covered her back, the scars that Marcus had used to shame her, the scars that had made her feel like a monster for most of her life. She took a deep breath. "These are not ugly," she said to her reflection. "These are proof that I survived." The words Dominic had spoken to her 25 years ago, when he was just a bleeding boy defending a silent little girl. She finally believed them. The annual Stone Foundation Charity Gala was the most prestigious event in Chicago's social calendar. Every year, the city's elite gathered in a grand ballroom to donate money to orphanages and shelters across the state. Politicians, business leaders, celebrities, everyone who mattered came to be seen and to write checks that eased their consciences. This year, Dominic asked Elena to attend with him. "Only if you want to," he said carefully. "I understand if you're not ready to face a crowd." Elena thought about it for a long time. Part of her wanted to hide in the mansion forever, safe from prying eyes and whispered judgments. But another part of her, the part she was fighting to bring back to life, wanted to step into the light. "I'll go," she said. "I need to prove to myself that I'm not afraid anymore." On the night of the gala, Mrs. Margaret spent the entire afternoon helping Elena prepare. When she brought out the dress, Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was red, deep, rich, crimson red, and the back was completely open, designed to expose everything from her shoulders to her waist. Elena stared at it. "I can't wear this. My scars." "Your scars are part of you," Mrs. Margaret said firmly. "And you are beautiful." Elena put on the dress. She looked at herself in the mirror, at the burn scars sprawling across her exposed back, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. She was done hiding. When Elena descended the grand staircase, the ballroom fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to stare at the woman in red on Dominic Stone's arm. They saw the scars. They saw her standing tall despite them. Whispers rippled through the crowd, but Elena kept walking, her chin held high. Dominic led her through the room, introducing her to important guests, but never speaking for her. He let her find her own voice. He let her shine. For the first hour, Elena almost forgot about everything. She talked, she smiled, she even laughed. She felt almost normal. Then she saw him. Marcus Webb stood near the bar, a glass of champagne in his hand. He had come as a guest of a business partner, someone who didn't know what kind of monster hid behind that handsome face. When Marcus spotted Elena, his expression shifted. Surprise, then calculation. He set down his glass and walked toward her. Elena's heart pounded, but she didn't run. She didn't hide. She stood her ground. "Elena," Marcus said smoothly, that familiar, charming smile spreading across his face. "You look incredible. I've been worried about you." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know I made mistakes. Come home with me. We can work this out." Elena looked at him. The man who had beaten her, starved her, made her believe she was worthless. She wasn't afraid anymore. Mistakes? Elena's voice rang out clearly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Is that what you call it?" Marcus's smile faltered. "Elena, lower your voice." "No." Elena took a step forward, and Marcus actually stepped back. "For 2 years, you controlled every aspect of my life. You decided what I ate, what I wore, who I spoke to. You made me stand in front of a mirror and call myself a monster." The crowd around them had gone silent. People were turning, listening. "You hit me," Elena continued, her voice steady as steel. "You broke my ribs and refused to take me to a hospital. You told me no one would ever believe me. You told me I was worthless." Marcus's face had gone white. "You're lying. You're mentally unstable. Everyone knows I'm not unstable." Elena stepped closer, and her eyes blazed with a fire that had been building for years. "I'm finally awake, and I want everyone here to know exactly what kind of man you are." She lifted her chin, her scarred back proudly displayed for all to see. "These scars are from a fire that killed my parents when I was 3 years old. For most of my life, I was ashamed of them. You taught me to hate them even more. But now I know the truth." She paused. "These scars are proof that I survived, and I will survive you too." Elena turned and walked away, her head held high, her red dress flowing behind her like a warrior's banner. Marcus stood frozen, the eyes of Chicago's elite fixed on him with disgust and suspicion. His reputation was crumbling in real time. Dominic appeared at Elena's side as she reached the edge of the ballroom. His gray eyes were shining with something she had never seen before. Pride. "Do you need me to do anything?" he asked quietly. Elena looked back at Marcus, still standing there, pale and trembling, surrounded by people who were already stepping away from him. She smiled. "No," she said. "I handled it myself." After the gala, Marcus Webb's world collapsed like a house of cards. The whispers started that very night. By morning, they had become a roar. Everyone who had attended the gala told someone else, and those people told more. The story of the successful lawyer who had beaten and tortured his wife spread through Chicago's elite like wildfire. Business partners distanced themselves immediately. No one wanted to be associated with an abuser. Clients canceled contracts. Colleagues stopped returning calls. The prestigious law firm that had employed Marcus for over a decade called him into a meeting and terminated him on the spot. "We can't have someone like you representing our brand," the senior partner said coldly. "Clean out your desk." But the worst blow came from an unexpected source. Rachel Webb, Marcus's younger sister, had been silent for years. She had watched her brother cycle through relationships, had seen the bruises on women who stayed too briefly to be called girlfriends. She had been too afraid to speak. Elena's courage at the gala changed that. Rachel went to the police. She told them about the 2 women before Elena. 2 women who had been engaged to Marcus. 2 women who had seemed perfectly happy until suddenly, they weren't. 2 women who had taken their own lives within months of ending their relationships with him. The police opened an investigation. Detectives dug through Marcus's past and found a pattern of abuse stretching back 15 years. Medical records, police reports that had been dismissed, testimonies from neighbors who had heard screaming but never called for help. Marcus was arrested 3 weeks after the gala. Elena was called to testify at the trial. She walked into the courtroom with her head held high, wearing a simple black dress with an open back. She didn't hide her scars. She had nothing left to hide. She told the jury everything. The starvation, The beatings, the psychological torture. The night he broke her ribs and refused to let her see a doctor. The way he had made her stand before mirrors and repeat that she was a monster. Her voice didn't waver once. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty. On all counts: domestic abuse, assault, criminal negligence contributing to the deaths of 2 women. Marcus Webb was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As the guards led him away in handcuffs, Marcus turned and looked at Elena one last time. His eyes were filled with hatred, with disbelief, with the rage of a man who had never imagined his victims would fight back. Elena met his gaze without flinching. "I hope you have enough time," she said quietly, "to think about what you've done." The courtroom doors closed behind him. Elena walked out into the sunlight, and for the first time in years, she felt truly free. The grand opening of Second Dawn arrived on a spring morning filled with golden sunshine. Elena stood inside her bakery, watching the light stream through the big glass windows and fall across the wooden tables and display cases filled with fresh pastries. The smell of butter, vanilla, and warm bread filled the air. Everything was exactly as she had dreamed. A new dawn, a second chance. Her name for the bakery had never felt more real. Mrs. Margaret arrived first, wearing a new apron with Second Dawn embroidered on the chest. Her eyes were wet with proud tears as she looked around. "You did it, child," she whispered, pulling Elena into a tight embrace. "You really did it." Father Thomas came next, the elderly priest from the church beside street, Michael's. He blessed the bakery with holy water and a gentle prayer, his voice warm and full of hope. Then came the children. 15 orphans from street, Michael's, their eyes wide as they pressed against the glass cases, staring at the colorful pastries arranged inside. Elena had arranged with the orphanage that the children could eat here for free, not just today, but any time they wanted. She knelt down to greet them, remembering what it felt like to be small and hungry and forgotten by the world. One little girl hung back from the group. She was about 7 years old, with tangled brown hair and a deep scar that ran across her left cheek and down to her jaw. She clutched the hand of a caretaker, her eyes fixed on the floor. Elena's heart clenched. She knew that posture, that shame. She walked over and knelt down so she was at eye level with the child. "What's your name?" Elena asked softly. The girl didn't look up. "Lily," she whispered. "That's a beautiful name." Elena paused. "Can I show you something, Lily?" Slowly, the little girl raised her eyes. Elena turned around, revealing the burn scars that covered her back. She heard Lily gasp softly. "I have scars too," Elena said, turning back to face her. "I got them when I was even younger than you. For a long time, I thought they made me ugly. I thought no one would ever love me because of them." Lily's eyes were wide, glistening with tears. "But I was wrong," Elena continued. "Scars don't make us ugly. They prove we survived something terrible, and kept going." She reached out and gently touched Lily's cheek. "You're beautiful, Lily. Don't let anyone ever tell you different." Lily stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, a tiny smile crossed her face. Near noon, when the crowd had thinned, the bell above the door rang one more time. Elena looked up and saw Dominic step inside. He wore a white shirt instead of his usual black, and in his hand was a single white rose. He walked to the counter and held out the flower. "Congratulations, Elena." Elena took it, feeling the soft petals against her fingers. She looked at Dominic, the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld, standing in the middle of her small bakery like he belonged there. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." 3 months later, Elena signed the adoption papers for Lily. The little girl moved into the Stone mansion, her few belongings fitting into a single small bag. Elena gave her the bedroom next to her own, filled with new clothes and toys and books. On their first night as a family, Lily sat at the dinner table, looking around with wonder at the grand room. Then her eyes settled on Dominic. "Are you my dad?" she asked quietly. Dominic froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at Elena, silently asking permission. Elena nodded, tears in her eyes. Dominic set down his fork and moved to kneel beside Lily's chair. He looked into her eyes, his expression softer than Elena had ever seen. "If you want me to be," he said, "I'll be your dad." Lily threw her arms around his neck. "I want you to be." That night, for the first time in its history, the Stone mansion echoed with the sound of a child's laughter. 6 months after the bakery opened, Dominic asked Elena to take a drive with him. He didn't say where they were going. He just held out his hand and asked her to trust him. Elena took it without hesitation. They drove through the streets of Chicago as the sun set behind the skyline. Elena watched the familiar neighborhoods pass by. not recognizing the route until the car turned down a quiet road on the outskirts of the city. Her breath caught. Street. Michael's orphanage rose before them, its old brick walls glowing amber in the fading light. The place where she had lost everything. The place where she had found Dominic. "Why are we here?" Elena whispered. Dominic parked the car and turned to her. "There's something I need to show you." They walked around the side of the building, past the garden where Elena used to hide, past the windows of the dormitory where she had cried herself to sleep so many nights. Dominic led her to a rusted fire escape at the back of the east wing. "Do you remember?" he asked. Elena looked up at the ladder and felt tears prick her eyes. The roof. They climbed together, just as they had done countless times as children. When they reached the top, Elena stepped onto the flat section above the east wing and felt time collapse around her. This was their place, their secret sanctuary beneath the stars. The moon hung full and bright overhead, casting silver light across the rooftop. The autumn wind was cool against Elena's skin, carrying the scent of dying leaves and distant chimney smoke. Dominic stood beside her, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. 17 years ago, we sat here on my last night, he said quietly. You asked me to promise I would come back. I couldn't make that promise. I didn't know if I would survive. Elena reached for his hand. But you did survive. I survived for you. Dominic turned to face her, his gray eyes shining in the moonlight. Everything I built, every empire I conquered, every drop of blood I spilled, it was all so I could be strong enough to protect you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to one knee. Elena's heart stopped. Elena, his voice was rough, trembling in a way she had never heard before. I am darkness. I've done terrible things. I've killed men and built my throne on their bones. I am not a good man. I don't deserve you. He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, unadorned, gleaming softly in the moonlight. But I love you, he continued. I have loved you since I was 10 years old and you were a silent little girl with scars on her back. I loved you when you were a child. I loved you when you married someone else. I loved you when you stood on that bridge ready to let go. Tears streamed down Elena's face. I will love you until my last breath, Dominic said. And if you'll let me, I want to spend whatever time I have left proving that you deserve to be loved. Will you marry me? Elena didn't answer right away. Instead, she sank to her knees in front of him. So they were eye to eye, heart to heart. Your darkness has been my shelter for 25 years, she whispered. When the whole world told me I was a monster, you told me I was beautiful. When everyone abandoned me, you stayed. Even when I couldn't see you, you were there. She cupped his face in her hands. Yes, she said, I'll marry you. I said yes the moment I was 3 years old, and you were the first person who ever told me my scars didn't make me ugly. I just didn't know it until now. Dominic slid the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. Then he pulled her close and kissed her beneath the moonlight, on the rooftop where they had once said goodbye through tears. The circle had finally closed. Where they had been torn apart, they were now bound together. Where there had been heartbreak, there was now hope. And high above the orphanage, where two broken children had once found each other, the stars witnessed the beginning of forever. The wedding was held in the small chapel at St. Michael's orphanage. It wasn't a grand affair with hundreds of guests and glittering extravagance. There were only the worn wooden pews, the stained glass windows casting rainbow light across the stone floor, and the people who truly mattered. Mrs. Margaret sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she watched the two orphan children she had loved like her own finally stand before the altar. Father Thomas officiated, his voice warm and steady as he read the blessings. Victor and Sam, Dominic's most trusted men, stood as groomsmen in crisp black suits, rare smiles softening their usually stern faces. And walking down the aisle ahead of the bride, scattering white rose petals with careful precision, was Lily, wearing a pale pink dress and beaming with joy. Then Elena appeared at the chapel doors. She wore a simple white gown that flowed like water around her. The back was open, her burn scars visible for everyone to see. She no longer hid them. She no longer felt shame. They were part of her story, and her story was one of survival. Dominic stood at the altar, watching her walk toward him. His gray eyes glistened with tears he didn't bother to hide. The most powerful man in Chicago, the boss who made the entire underworld tremble, was crying at the sight of his bride. When Elena reached him, she took his hands in hers. I never thought I would find home, she said softly, her voice carrying through the silent chapel. I spent my whole life looking for a place to belong, but I was wrong. Home isn't a place. She squeezed his hands, her eyes never leaving his. You are my home, Dominic. Not this building, not the mansion. You. Wherever you are, that's where I belong. Dominic lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. And you are mine. You always have been. You always will be. They exchanged rings. They spoke their vows. And when Father Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Dominic pulled Elena into a kiss that held 25 years of waiting, hoping, and loving from afar. The small crowd erupted in applause. Lily jumped up and down, clapping her hands. Mrs. Margaret sobbed openly into her handkerchief. 2 broken children had finally found their way back to each other. 1 year later, Second Dawn had opened its 3rd location in downtown Chicago. Elena had helped more than 50 women escape abusive situations, giving them jobs, shelter, and most importantly, hope. Her bakeries had become sanctuaries, places where broken people could begin to heal. Lily was growing up happy and loved. She called Elena Mom and Dominic Dad, and she smiled more than she cried. The scar on her face had become just another part of who she was, not something to hide. One morning, Elena woke in Dominic's arms. Sunlight poured through the curtains, filling their bedroom with warmth. She lay still for a moment, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feeling the strength of his arms around her. She looked at the scar on his right arm, the one he had carried since he was 10 years old, earned while protecting her. Then she thought of her own scars, the ones that covered her back, the ones that had once made her feel like a monster. Our scars are proof that we survived, she whispered. Dominic stirred, his voice rough with sleep. What did you say? Elena turned in his arms and pressed a soft kiss to his lips. Our scars are proof that we survived, but now, we're not just surviving anymore. Dominic pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. No, now we're living. They lay there in the golden morning light, 2 souls who had walked through fire and darkness and found each other on the other side. Sometimes darkness doesn't come to swallow you whole. It comes to shelter you from those who think they are the light. And sometimes, the person who loves you most isn't the one who makes sweet promises and turns you into a prisoner. It's the one who stands quietly in the shadows, waiting until you're ready to be loved, waiting until you walk out of the cage on your own, without anyone breaking down the door. Elena and Dominic's story is a reminder that your worth is not defined by where you come from or by what others say about you. You deserve love and respect simply because you are you. If you are in a relationship that makes you feel small and worthless, remember that you have the right to leave. A new dawn is always waiting for those who dare to step out of the darkness. If this story touched your heart, please press the like button to support our channel. Share this video with anyone you think needs to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more moving stories every day. We want to know how you feel about this story. Have you ever met someone like Elena? Have you ever witnessed a love as patient and true as Dominic's love for her? How does this story connect to your own life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We always want to hear what lies deep in your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in each new day. May you find your own second dawn, no matter how dark the night has been. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.